For a targeted quest through the tangled roots of reality, this is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. First, a plea for your attention. With the world careening as it is towards a complicated future, all the crises of the moment congealing into a walled prison that threatens to limit the expression of human potential, the only way out is through accelerated exploration. Not of jungles, ocean trenches, the moon, or even other planets, our interior. The road forward points inward, and such personal progress can arc like an electric charge from one seeker to the next, energizing the composite human psyche toward a future phase change. We all, I believe, have to do that inner work. To complete the circuit, however, from one psychic node to the next requires dialogue. Until consciousness is better understood and we perfect nonverbal modes of communication, information between people is best exchanged via the analog machinery of lips, tongue, vocal cords, and breath. This show is a setting for such. Here we push boundaries and seek out the faintest glimpses of insight, shrugging off old paradigms to embrace our own ignorance. By doing so, we celebrate possibility. It's not about choosing your favorite narrative. Rather, we simply reserve the right to wonder and to dream, to become. This, I believe, is a re-emerging human superpower. But to be real, in the content tsunami that now chokes this binary world of bits and bupkis, getting noticed becomes almost impossible. So in this upcoming year, here's where you can help. Support this channel. Like, comment, and subscribe. Find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and give us a follow. And if you want to help us build a new temple to possibility, a tower of light to help show the way, join us on Patreon, engage in our Discord, and help us do the actual work. Take action and be recognized, or be content to let others referee your reality. Now, one of the questions we circle again and again here on Neon Galactic involves the nature of that reality. Offering theories on such has long been a rather sacred human endeavor, a task taken up by our most brilliant thinkers since the ancestors first convened around a campfire. In recent decades, following all the rather mystifying revelations that emerged over decades from quantum physics, those explanations have begun to wax more and more metaphysical. It seems almost as if our species has come full circle, through animism and magic, into myth, then clambering aboard a bullet train of materialism that in recent years has shown signs of failure. More and more, we now seem to be off the rails. At the same time, our ongoing preoccupation with technology, computers, algorithms, and information has provided us with another useful tool in understanding how the universe arises from chaos in the first place. Our guest today, Ryan Kralik, has, like a lot of us, been on an intellectual sojourn these past several years to grok the nature of consciousness, reality, the universe, and our human mind. He, unlike many, has made real progress. He's finishing up a book entitled It From Us, an information first framework and the purpose of consciousness, which lays out a comprehensive argument for how information lies at the root of everything and can accommodate the broad roster of anomalies we cover so often here on this show. It's a notion that seems both ancient and modern, pulling from the mystical wisdom of our predecessors while being expressed in the language of ones and zeros. Both seem true, both seem necessary, both seem to lead to the same transcendent reality. It's my pleasure to have Ryan on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So, your theory is rather mind-blowing, and it seems to be a sort of an amalgamation of various streams of thought that have been developing in various corners. And your book, I've read a draft, seems to do a really good job of demonstrating where you're drawing for a lot of these different ideas. I want to get to your theory, of course. That's the main topic of this conversation. But let's start with who is Ryan, and how did you get interested in this stuff? And yeah, we'll start there.
Well, since childhood, um, my brain worked differently. That was like pretty obvious by maybe the second grade. Um, I question things. That's always been my nature. If you tell me now, when you're a kid, though, here's how that manifests. Somebody tells you to do something, you want to know why. And so it's through my tradition, it was kind of discouraged. It's just kind of looked at as a, whatever, a personality problem or a fitting in problem. But around the time I was 10 or 11, it was revealed to me that Santa Claus doesn't exist. And if I had to pinpoint a period in my life where there was a clear divergence for me, it was that. Because, I was raised Catholic and I went to Catholic school. As soon as I found out Santa Claus wasn't real, which means they've been lying to me the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But immediately I saw how that story correlated, pretty tightly with a lot of other stories that my school and my tradition was telling me. I didn't necessarily examine it this analytically at the time, but I just said, oh, maybe these other things are made up too. But if you really examine the Santa Claus story, I mean, it is an exercise in do what we say, get your rewards. Don't do what we say, don't get your rewards. And believe things that we tell you to believe, whether they're true or not, right?
Yeah.
So kind of the next thing that happened was I started examining my religious tradition. Arrived
Which
to
was
be
which was just
Catholicism.
yeah.
Yeah, Catholicism. I went to Catholic school and all that. So I, by a year or two later, I was an atheist, very vocal atheist in a community of Catholics who already didn't like that I asked why all the time. So that's kind of where it started. And so from that point on, I just kind of got into the habit of exploration. They weren't going to teach me about evolution at church or at the Catholic school, so I went to the library to learn it. And then shortly after that, I quit going to Catholic school and went to public school. And of course, the tradition there is different. So, but along the lines, I've studied physics was difficult, especially when you get into the quantum stuff. It's pretty difficult to understand. I don't think there's a lot of people that you're going to talk to, even if they're in that field of study for a living. I don't think there's a lot of people you're going to talk to who intuitively understand how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But UAPs and remote viewing, I mean, ancient civilizations, these are things that have kind of bubbled up in the last few years into the kind of the zeitgeist. But I've studied these things for a long time, and of course, alongside that, I always studied religion, um, which always fascinated me. I think for different reasons, maybe than it fascinates some people. What I wanted to know is kind of fundamentally what's wrong with people that makes them accept these things despite it's like I'm trying to triage civilization or the human psyche. What is it that makes you accept as fact something that can be demonstrated to you to be false as easily as it can be now? And so these were the stack of books on the table have been these topics for the last 30 years.
But from originally
And
from a skeptical perspective, is that right? Like you
oh
were
yeah,
basically
yeah,
like, okay,
yeah. But not that I'm opposed to believing things that can be demonstrated.
yeah,
But I'm opposed to believing things, or I shouldn't say that. I'm not opposed to believing things that cannot be demonstrated. But I am opposed to that as a regular practice,
yeah,
right? I've always tried to approach things somewhat scientifically. Start with what is known and explore out from there, not start with a supposition and figure out a reason that it's right.
yeah.
Which I think is what you mentioned that there's a lot of this kind of discovery going on right now, but it doesn't take too much time spent on the internet to realize that the vast majority of it isn't really discovery.
Yeah. Oh
It's
no.
just,
Yeah.
click, clicky click headline stuff. And, not a ton of folks, compared to the totality of what's out there, are necessarily approaching some of these problems scientifically. And so that's my nature, is to, I don't want an answer. I want the answer, right? I'm not just looking for something that fits. And a lot of folks, particularly people that come up with frameworks like I have, that it doesn't pass my smell test. Like, did you arrive at this because it fit and it looks good on the screen? Or, you know, is there really data that backs this up?
Yeah.
But as far as my background, then the my whole professional career has been spent primarily in marketing,
Hmm.
sales. So, crafting messaging, telling stories, explaining things to people who maybe don't have an underlying basis to really understand it technically, but need to at least be presented with enough, of a coherent message to be able to make a decision. So
It
that's
seems
kind of
like
my background.
a natural fit for you. Your book is, I mean, you may not come from a science background, but it presents with a lot of rigor, and I think, and it makes a really sound argument for what you are arguing in the book. But you seem to have made what Jeffrey Kripal calls the flip, uh, where the things that you came at skeptically at first, at least some of them have now become something that you feel is an actuality. You mentioned a brief experiment that you performed with remote viewing in your book, and that would be obviously mind-blowing. And I've had similar experiences. But what was what caused the gate to swing open for you, so to speak, to where you were like suddenly confronted with the reality of this weird shit?
Yeah, well, right kind of when COVID was happening, everything's closed, like that phase of COVID. I had a company, and somebody wanted to buy it, so I sold it to him. Which, I didn't really have much of a plan for what I was going to do after that. But it was enough money that I was like, well, okay, I'll figure it out. But then COVID had changed a lot of things. So even if you had a plan in 2020 or 2021, odds are it wasn't going to hold, another year or two. So I kind of found myself twiddling my thumbs and, taking naps in the middle of the day. And before I knew it, I was, suffering from fairly severe depression. Not just because of that, but I think that was maybe the biggest contributing factor at the time. So, I'm this psychiatrist, that psychiatrist, and my experience is, by and large, the psychiatric community really only, I mean, they have several thousand tools, but they're all the same, right? There's just try this, come back in 2 weeks, try that, come back in 2 weeks. So I was on all these, just tons of medications, like 12, 15 medications in 2 years, up to 4 or 5 at a time. And it was making things worse, not better. And so, but during that time, I kind of needed something to keep myself busy. So I started digging back into these topics kind of with a renewed vigor. Reading Robert Bivol books and uh, Graham Hancock books and things like that. Listening to Rogan, which I don't really do anymore, I might add. But I kind of went down these 4 or 5 rabbit holes again, all at the same time.
Mhm.
And one of those was UAPs, and so I was, looking for interesting things, which also, UAPs is kind of turned into a different thing over the last 6, 7 years, particularly the last 2 or 3. And so, where before it was difficult really to get a lot of information that could be considered verifiably good, all of a sudden, this topic was worth another look. So that took me to Ingo Swann's book, Penetration,
Mhm.
which I was reading because I wanted to hear what this guy said about, aliens.
Mhm.
But actually, what that book is mostly about is remote viewing. And so, I read that, and then I read another one by Lynn Buchanan called The Seventh Sense. And halfway through that book, I was like, I can't, I can't do this. This is not who I am. I'm not crazy person who reads crazy stuff and turns crazy, starts believing crazy things. So what I kind of did was, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, I could put
Just
this.
real quick, I love that
Yeah.
confrontation with self. It's like when you start getting into these subjects, you have that like personal like self-check moment. You're like, "Oh, really? Am I, am I gonna,
Hopefully,
yeah."
yeah,
Well, that's
hopefully you
right. I
do.
mean, if you're healthy, you do, and then, it
Yeah.
sort of determines what your next steps are. But yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just, I kind of thought, well, I'll just try this. And if it doesn't work, like I know it won't, then I can move on to something else, before I really go nuts. And so I just kind of in a matter of minutes, I threw together a rudimentary experiment. I grabbed a glass marble, kid's marble, out of a drawer and wrapped it in paper, stuck it in my pocket, went and found my wife, who was, elsewhere, paying no attention to what I was doing, generally paying no attention to what I was reading, other than I might put the book down and say, oh, listen to what they said. And she's like, okay, great, more crazy stuff that you're reading. And so I went and grabbed her and got some paper and a pen. And I said, come here and sit down, do what I say, and don't think, which she agreed to, which was also weird. And then so I slid the paper in front of her. I said, I'm going to give you a number. I want you to write the number down, make a squiggle on the paper, and then using only adjectives, I want you to describe basically what your mind knows about the item in my pocket. And so she did that, and she wrote, round, small, smooth, and green. And I was like, son of a bitch. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what's in my pocket is a marble. And she drew it. She drew a circle, squiggly lines in the middle. And I said, I asked her, I said, did you know what this was when you were drawing it? She's like, no, you said, don't think. I'm like, oh man, that's exactly how they say it works. Um, so you're faced with something there. Okay. There is no way to explain that using the science provided. It doesn't fit. And I've looked, right? Immediately, the question in my mind was, how does this work? That's what I need to know. I need to know how this works. So I actually studied remote viewing, took classes in remote viewing, learned how to do it to the proficiency anyway yeah, you wouldn't be able to convince me without very, very serious data that it isn't a legitimate thing, right? And in fact, it would require an explanation even weirder than the one I'm proposing, right?
Yeah.
For that to be the result of particles and fields and waves and space-time. And so that that's kind of where it's kind of where I drifted off course, as it were. But
Yeah.
what drove me was I wanted to know how it worked. And so even when I'm taking these classes, I could tell I'm kind of irritating to the people teaching the classes and the other students because they want to learn, they're all in touch with their artistic side and whatnot. And so they're like, they're just there in a different place than I am. I want to know what everybody thinks. How do you think this works? What's the best mechanism you've ever heard to explain this? And nobody had any. Nobody had any good ones. So about a year ago, I was, and I never let this subject go since that happened. It's been, at least one of the two or three main things I'm focused on ever since that day with the marble is trying to understand this. So one day I was using AI, and it started out. I was kind of having a conversation with it, you know, let's talk about remote viewing. And it started out, well, it's not scientifically proven. It's pretty much fringe. And I stopped it and I said, I'm a trained remote viewer. I know that it's real. Cut the shit. And it said, oh, okay, well, in that case, yeah, I do know about it. And then, so I had it do a couple remote viewing sessions, and it was being tricky. It was like, um, it described a couple of good ones, had a couple of misses, and then I said, okay, now you give me one. It wanted my results before it gave me the picture, that kind of thing. It's a AI is a scumbag,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you should
No,
treat it like that. It's a lying scumbag that cannot be trusted. Do not ever leave any decisions about anything important up to AI. Do not do it.
yeah.
And we can get into that later. But anyway, so I started asking it. All right, you have access to the accumulated knowledge of mankind. Give me a mechanism, and it gave me the normal junk. Oh, maybe there's a particle, maybe there's a field. You know, I'm like, no, you're going to have to do better than that. I've already been down that road, but I remembered seeing a show or a you know podcast, whatever the heck these things are called now,
Hmm.
where Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein were having a discussion about UAP and remote viewing, and Hal Puthoff had said something along the lines of maybe maybe information is somehow a fundamental aspect of reality that we don't understand. And so I asked the AI, I said, well, let's assume that information is fundamental. How might remote viewing work then? And it said, well, if information is fundamental, then remote viewing, uh, space and time and transmission may not be relevant at all, because if information underlies reality, then it's probably more like a query than it is an astral travel thing, right?
Hmm.
And that was, I didn't think it was perfect, just explained like that, but it was the best um, possible mechanism that I had heard, and so I thought it was worth another look, and so that's what I did. I started, first I went and tried to find anything else I could find, that Hal Puthoff or some guys like that had said about it, and along the lines, I ended up having to study a bunch of things that I never would have looked at,
Yeah.
actual information theory and so on. But so I just started testing things against that assumption that information is somehow fundamental. And by the, second was UAP. And I was like, okay, well, if information is fundamental and consciousness is our access interface with what I call an underlying informational substrate,
Yeah.
then our consciousness, when a remote viewing is happening, or any number of other things in the same category, basically what's happening is you're sidestepping space-time rules, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
You're kind of, now it's clunky, and it's not very good. Even a great remote viewer, if they're honest, is going to tell you half the time, I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. But that it is in defiance of our current understanding of the laws of physics. So I started thinking about that, and I'm like, well, UAP, when you really look at it through this framework, it all of a sudden makes sense why they can move instantaneously, because space time is not an obstacle for them. Atmospheres are not an obstacle. Mountains are not an obstacle. The water is not, it's not the same for that vehicle as it is for you and I, which means that they're not spaceships. They're substrate level rule editors. They're reality rewriters. And when you understand what consciousness is, how it works, um, I've been kind of back and forth working with some guys that are uh, putting together maybe one of the most comprehensive remote viewing experiments ever done. So you can do it. In fact, it's a website called Social RV, social-rv.com. And you can go there right now, and in 30 seconds, you can be doing a remote viewing. And they're gathering that data uh, and testing it against all different kinds of factors. And one of the factors that I suggested to them is, could we get people hooked up to something so that we can see informationally what's happening in their body,
Hmm.
and test that, and basically look at that data against, okay, when certain things are happening in their body, we see a certain result. But anyway, that's actually not dissimilar from what I theorize about the UAPs, which
Yeah.
is it's not a machine in the sense that we think of machines. It's not a mechanical thing. It's probably like a consciousness and intent amplifier.
Yeah.
Uh, so basically it amplifies the only thing we know of that has substrate level access, which is consciousness. But sorry, I went off track there.
No, I love it. I want to back up a little bit. And I mean, I think what is consciousness then? I mean, obviously, that's something that we're all wrestling with across science and, even the humanities. It's something that we never get away from, obviously. And the hard problem of Chalmers, we don't know how it arises out of physical brains, if that is the mechanism. But using your informational substrate theory as a kind of a genesis, what um, is consciousness and what is the human being?
Yeah, well, consciousness is special and human beings are special, but neither of them are that special. So the underlying informational substrate to reality in my framework,
Mhm.
it has a bias toward coherent outcomes, right? It's not just underlying the physical universe is an informational arrangement that we can't see or doesn't exist as we define existence. That alone wouldn't give us any of the things that we see. It has a bias towards coherent outcomes, which is what we see in quantum mechanics. We see no particles under certain conditions, and then under other conditions, there's particles when coherence requires their presence, right? Even though technically they're not particles anyway, but that's another discussion. So, so we see it kind of across domains. A religion with the best informationally coherent arrangement or structure is going to perform the best. A biological system follows the same rules. One of at least I think it's the most controversial thing that I say in the book, in the framework, is that gravity is not properly explained, if I'm right.
Yeah.
There aren't 5 different forces in the universe. There's only one, biased toward coherent structures that persist. So the rules of evolution follow that, just like the rules of all material follow that. And uh, you'd expect everything to become more complex with time, which is what we see. We see it in every aspect of the universe that we examine, and biology is just kind of, as far as we know, the latest thing on the scene, following this coherence bias, which leads to more and more complex organizations. So, in my framework, the substrate. What's the best way to say this? The substrate doesn't love you. It biases coherence, right? Now,
But that's
I
semantics, right? Like, I mean, to my
it
mind, and
is.
reading your book, I was like, okay, well, coherence could be another word for what we experience as love. I mean, depending
Well,
on like the subjectivity of that, action, seems like there may be, a confusion of terms there, but maybe they're the same thing.
no, you're right. I mean, love is a coherent strategy. Um, I don't find it coincidental at all that if you really break down what my framework says, if I show that to a person of faith, they're immediately going to say, well, and this has happened, what you're describing is God. And I say, well, no, what you call God is what I'm describing. There isn't any evidence that what I'm describing is God, but there is evidence that what you call God is what I'm describing, is just what I see.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily a problem. Um, why would you expect our religious traditions and ontology, uh, myths, why would you expect them to be reflective of something different than that? If
Yeah.
if in fact that's where we come from. If remote viewing is substrate level access, and you rewind to when scientific discovery was not a thing, you'd have people asking these questions kind of deep inside themselves, right? And it's not at all weird that the substrate can tell me what's in the envelope, but wouldn't be able to tell me, through the filter of my own mind, which only contains things that I do already understand. You wouldn't expect it to provide information other than that. So I actually do think that our religions and our faiths, it's not all they are, but one of the things that they are is the answer to the question, near as the people, when it was written down, were able to comprehend it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that people might say is that you're saying that the universe has a bias towards coherence, but other people would say the laws of thermodynamics are contrary to that. How do you express, or how do you get around that, that argument?
No, they're not.
Okay.
See how easy that was?
Well, I like that. That's what the hell? Just go for it.
Yeah. So
But you
the
know what I'm saying, right?
thermodynamic,
That we
I
trend
do.
toward disorder and yeah.
Well, yes, things do trend. I don't know that I accept that nomenclature. The
Okay.
the way that my framework sees it is this: the default state, which is, in my opinion, probably reflective of the underlying pre-existence state, right? Is nothing. An absence of order is one way to look at it. But you got to remember that a lot of these thermodynamics laws are they're extremely specific. Um, and one of the prerequisites is in a closed system, right? In a closed
Mhm.
system, all things tend toward disorder,
Entropy.
right? Entropy.
Yeah.
Well, fine, but a closed system, that's a thought experiment. That doesn't exist, right? Like, I've heard people of faith try to use the second law of thermodynamics to prove intelligent design because all things tend toward disorder. It's like, well, listen, all you got to do is read two more sentences in the law, and you'll see that the argument was imploded, because a biological system in and of itself is not a closed system, right? It does the exact definition of what a not closed system does, which is it takes energy from outside and uses it against entropic results, right? So that coherence bias is the twin of entropy, is what you
Mhm.
could really say, right? And I don't think entropy is a force. I think it's just what happens when there isn't a force, right? But hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Yeah.
It can be a little bit easy when you're talking about thermodynamics. It can be a little bit easy to kind of end up in the weeds, but
Yeah.
that's the you know mile 1 mile altitude viewpoint that I have on it.
Yeah. One of the things, the title of the book is "It From Us," and that's a reference, I think, to John Wheeler's "It from Bit," idea. What are you trying to get at with that title? How are us? How is us? How whatever? How do we uh,
And so
get
can
it?
you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I necessarily put all that much. Um, I don't stack all that much on the title. I
Okay.
think it was a tip of the hat to John Wheeler, who I think maybe was the first one to say something that I consider to be the closest to the beginning of an understanding of what I'm saying. And what he said was, it from bit,
Mhm.
which inherently is saying that the thing is a result of the information about it. And I don't think that he carried that. He coined the phrase, and he put his toe in the water, but he pulled it out pretty quick. And I I think that that's representative of something that is, we get a lot from it, but it also costs us a lot, which is the siloification of academia. Um, Early on when I started looking at this seriously, some people, their initial response would be, "Well, you don't have a PhD. What do you know about any of this?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not saying that there's nothing to what you're saying, but somebody with a PhD wouldn't do this, frankly. Or at least there's probably very few people that would. If you have a PhD, if you're John Wheeler, I think didn't he come up with the name black hole?
I believe so. Yeah.
I think he did, yeah. So you're the guy that invented black holes, right? You're not going to write a book about religion and sociology and cross domain studies. It's just very unlikely that that's going to happen, because you would lose credibility in your circle. In your field, if you did that, other people, your peers would look at that and say, well, that's crazy. I mean, look at guys like Rupert Sheldrake. Even within his own silo, he just, he gets just a little bit, and they're like, whoa, 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 Rupert. And frankly, if he wasn't so popular with it, they'd have probably booted him out a long time ago.
Yeah.
But that's what our scholarly situation is right now. Is it's extremely difficult for somebody who has spent 30 or 40 years studying quantum mechanics to bridge that to biology, to religion, to lots of other things. And so I guess I had that in mind when I came up with the title too. Is here you've got this guy who kind of had it. If I'm right, he saw it.
Yeah.
But
It's
he
interesting.
didn't.
Go ahead.
He didn't keep pulling the string.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about these topics is that it calls people to engage with these questions that they would otherwise feel disqualified from participating in. It's like you get supercharged with your curiosity and a sense of wonder, and then all of a sudden the universe kind of opens up to your own inquiry. And I think that that's one of the things that I appreciate most. It gets people thinking and entertaining ideas that they may not have prior. So I think, even if it's not necessarily someone's field and they take on some of these questions, that doesn't mean that the questions they're asking or the ideas that they're putting forth don't have merit. And I think that we've gotten to this place scholastically with hyper specialization and everything else, where the only way that your word is ever of value is when it is coming from, this long, genetic line of intellectual development, and I think we lose something in that kind of world. So,
Oh,
um,
you're completely right. It's not just that aspect of our society either.
mhm,
Uh, this is probably one of the last podcasts I'll do for a while, only because it's gotten to be extremely time consuming just figuring out which ones you shouldn't go on,
yeah,
which has been kind of a learning curve, because those silos exist all over the place. It's not just the physicist doesn't want to hear what you have to say if you're not a physicist. It's the near death experience believer doesn't want to hear what you have to say if it violates what they've come to believe about near death experiences. Or there's a I'm not going to use his name because what he said was negative, and he didn't review it in the context that I would share it. But
mhm,
extremely well known philosopher,
mhm,
a publisher asked him to review my draft, my manuscript, and I don't know him, but I know some people who know him, and basically he wasn't. I mean, he wasn't unprofessional, but it's obvious that he didn't understand what I was getting at with the book. He was reading it as a philosopher reads a philosophy text,
Mhm.
And so he was critical of it in such a way that, he basically told the publisher, don't publish this. This guy doesn't have any credentials and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, fine. I value and respect your opinion. The work is better because you gave it to me. So I appreciate that. Thank you, unnamed philosopher.
Yeah.
But I could see it. And I've spent enough time with that person's work that I don't think it's a bridge too far for me to say that he's going to feel that way about anything where the framework does not call consciousness fundamental.
Yeah.
Because that's his silo, is the consciousness is fundamental silo. I don't have a silo. I
Yeah.
have two silos. Things that I think I can be convinced of and things that I cannot be. And so, I think that, frankly, I don't think a physicist is ever going to give you a framework that crosses that many domains. I don't think a philosopher will ever give you a framework that crosses that many domains. So whether or not I'm right, separate issue. But
Mhm.
you're not going to really find very many people who are masters of one of those silos, who can do anything beyond give you near as they can understand it, what that silo says about something. And I have the luxury of being able to, first of all, rely on the work of those people.
Mhm.
You know, uh, there's very few things in this book that I came up with. There's maybe three conclusions that I draw that I can't find anybody else has ever drawn them. But they're conclusions based on the work of these other people. And I'm not disparaging scholars. Keep
Mhm.
on doing what you're doing. Maybe try to keep more of an open mind when possible, but don't sacrifice the rigor for fantasy either.
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting. The podcast, like I suffer for being a generalist. My
Well,
show is
you're
not a
you're one of the good
subject.
ones, and I'm not just stroking you. You
I appreciate that.
actually, you're not clickbaity. You're not one of these, let's just have people on that validate the what you think the audience's preconceptions are. And I respect that. And you can tell by the guests that you have on that people notice it and they respect it too. But I've
Yeah.
been on a few where it's like you go read the comments afterwards, don't which they say don't do that, but I maybe wouldn't have known the situation if I hadn't. But
Yeah.
people are crazy,
Yeah.
right? They believe crazy things, and we love to be validated. We love it. Some of the biggest problems we have in our society right now are because it's so easy to become validated
Mhm.
in almost anything that you think or feel. And if you think that there is significant evidence that there's a galactic council and they've extended the quarantine on Earth and electrogravitic propulsion is already mastered, and all of these things that nothing even approaching a scientific uh, approach to an explanation of these things would ever get you anywhere near those conclusions, right? But that's why I kind of accepted it. I'm like, okay, it's just simply the wrong outlet for me.
Yeah.
One of those shows is reach. Frankly, isn't all that important to me anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things I wanted to hit on before we wrap this conversation up, which we're not going to do that anytime soon, but I wanted to make sure to get this in. There's your framework rhymes with some ancient mystical traditions, and but not only that, but then other scientific systems, which you've kind of already addressed. It seems to the Akashic record is something that sort of seems to hint toward this reality. And then, of course, and you mentioned Puthoff, the 0 point field. And then in your book, you mentioned David Bohm and the implicate order. Um, can you talk a little bit about how this is those things, but then maybe it's not those things in some sense or another?
Yeah,
Or is it those things? I mean,
it is. It is, and it's not. Those things are, in fact, a good example of what someone would arrive at from one of the silos.
hmm
So what there were like three people that I immediately, as soon as I had a framework, this was kind of I wasn't sure I was writing a book yet. I was just seeing does this all fit together in a way that makes any sense? And once I had that, I sent it to Hal Puthoff. I said, would you take 5 minutes and read this and tell me if I'm nuts? Excuse me. And he said, sure. And he read it. And he came back and said, this is pretty much, I'm paraphrasing, but it was pretty close to this. This is pretty much how I see it. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. And I also thought, well, why didn't you publish anything about it? Right. Because he's working on other stuff. Right. But
Yeah.
then I sent it to Rupert Sheldrake, who, I'm a huge fan of both of these guys, but
Yeah.
Rupert Sheldrake, I've read maybe not all of his books, but quite a few of his books. Probably watched every good lecture out there that he's done, and I'm a big fan.
Mhm.
And so when he actually kind of, his assistants were like, we'll pass it along to him. Don't hold your breath, kind of thing. And here's what was so funny. I haven't told this to anybody else, but when you're sending these emails off, you kind of develop like a form email, right?
Mhm.
Or I'm in sales. That's
Yeah.
what we do. You don't reinvent the wheel every time, right?
Yeah.
So, I've got whatever, 2 paragraphs, and one and a half of them are the same in every email, right? And I was copying and pasting that day, and I accidentally pasted the entire body of the email in the subject line to Rupert Sheldrake. And then I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God. Oh, I'm gonna look like such a fool. I'll never hear from him. But I did, like the same day he sent me an email. He's like, send me the thing, let me look at it. I sent it to him, and same thing, maybe a half hour. He comes back and he says, this is totally compatible with what I say about a morphic field. And well, yeah, because if I'm right, and I'm completely open to being wrong, but if I'm right, then what he's describing isn't just biology, right?
Yeah.
It's not just that there's a morphic field that biology pulls information from. It's that, you kind of zoom out, look at a lot of other things, bring them together, and you see, oh, the whole thing is a morphic field, right? Quantum mechanics is a demonstration of what the morphic field does. It instantiates the physical universe, right?
Mhm.
So I lost my train of thought, though. What was the question?
We were talking about how your idea relates to various theories that
Oh
have come
yeah,
before, but I hadn't mentioned Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance ideas, so that's one that you added in there, but we talked about the zero point field, implicate order.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bohm and those guys, basically they're all. It's not just them either. I mean, mainstream mathematics, whether it knows it or not, is indicating that what I'm saying has validity. Um, you know, Stephen
Also,
Wolfram,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah,
Carlo Rovelli, I mean, Eric Verlinde. Eric Verlinde says gravity is a result of the underlying informational structure. Now he might take what I'm saying and say, well, that's just a smidge farther than I'm necessarily willing to go, and I can accept that. But
yeah,
uh, all signs point to there is an underlying aspect to reality that is not physical and in this universe as we understand things to exist.
yeah.
And so that's not surprising at all. Akashic records, yeah, okay, that is a spiritual tradition's way to understand the thing.
Exactly.
Same with Holy Spirit. Same with um, any number of those explanations. Now, we're not amazing at explaining these things now. I don't expect more out of traditions that are thousands of years old,
Yeah.
but they're telling you in the language that they were able to understand it,
Which is
something
interesting
that's
because
very
they were
similar.
sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
it's interesting because they were accessing the informational field to come up with those ideas. I mean, these are people a lot of the times who were masters of that spiritual technology, right? Like, I mean, like people get mindful and quiet their conscious mind in order to remote view. The same thing is true of people who were in deep meditation. So they were getting glimpses of that truth and then just expressing it in the language that they had at hand, which is I think another point in the favor of what you're saying. I think that there is a consistency about the descriptions that points to deeper levels of truth.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think I talked about this on a show that I did a little while ago, but what I try to do uh, about human beings is look at them the same way I would look at any other system.
Mhm.
So recently I made the analogy that if you looked at an anthill, from up here looking at the anthill, and you've seen the documentary and they zoom in on this little ant, he's carrying the thing, and this little ant is doing this, and or bees, same thing. They have different jobs,
Hmm.
but I'll bet they don't know that, right? They're just doing what they do. And they have a queen, and she's born to be the queen. But she doesn't know that. She's just doing what she does. Well, I think human beings are not that dissimilar from that. We're just, we don't really necessarily have the best vantage point to zoom out because
Hmm.
we're in it.
Yeah.
But if you take that though and apply it to like past cultures, they're far enough away from us that I think you can examine it a little bit more like it's a little bit closer to the anthill than trying to look around your own town and see what's happening today. But
Hmm.
shamans are a part of what we do, just like queens are a part of what the ants do. Um, they and I would look at that. And when I say shaman, I'm talking about then. Today we have different types of shamans. I understand that, but you know, 5, 10,000 years ago, the shaman was the doctor, he was the scientist, he was the priest. He what he really was he was the substrate translator for the community.
Yeah.
Uh, I think fundamentally, and we kind of traded the shaman in for for an institutional version of it, which is organized religion.
Yeah.
And I think it's been helpful. Look around. We would not have anything that we have today if we hadn't seen that evolution take place. But I also feel like now we're to the point where okay, science went off its own way for a while, and I think that needed to happen. Thank God it happened. Colloquially, thank God, thank the
Yeah.
substrate that it happened. But now we're to the point where it's like okay, we've answered enough questions, I think, to where we can start examining religion for what it actually is. It's an encoded system of coherence and persistence strategies designed to get us through,
Mhm.
to hopefully, I think, where we are now. And
Yeah.
now we need to start organizing around, I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but, one of the things that you and I discussed before we started is, what hope does it offer? Where does it go?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's the part to me that's the most exciting. The slogging through emails back and forth with podcasts and stuff, and borderline complaining about it on a podcast. I know you're not supposed to do that, but all of this for me is not. It started out about the discovery, right? I wanted to know the answer,
Hmm.
but what it became and what it is for me now is I see it as I mean, yes, I want some people in science to come and look at this and say, okay, maybe there's some validity here. Let's get experimenting. But what I really see it as is a way for science and religion to see each that the other guy's doing his best
Yeah.
to tell you the truth, right?
Yeah.
And that fundamentally both of them are trying to tell you the truth. They're trying
Yeah.
to do the right thing. And what we need to do, I think, as a people, because we have a meaning problem right now. We have a real serious identity crisis, of meaning,
Hmm.
and none of this stuff that we're trying to solve it with is going to do that. I think it's all just going to make it worse until we can kind of see what the substrate has been telling us the whole time, which is you do matter. What you do does matter. How you conduct yourself is important. And I think UAP are flying around just appearing out of nowhere, barely visible, showing us you guys are at that point. Either you're going to figure this out and do this, or
Not.
right, or you know, there's an asteroid out there with your name on it. Good luck.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, anyway, sorry, I kind of
No, I love that. And
diverged there.
that's I think that where a lot of this is trending, I think toward unifying of sort of disparate kingdoms of human endeavor. I think that that's ideally where we end up. There's a couple of things I wanted to sort of dig in a little bit about the framework real quick. So a lot of people's ideas about God or even a conscious universe, say, is that a lot of what has been evolving over time is for the universe to know itself, right? And there's sort of implied a level of intent to the macro universe, right? But
Mhm.
it's a being in the process of becoming, and all of us are sort of um, a part of that. How does that fit within your system, or does it not? I mean, if it's a informational framework, does it have intent? Is there that level of consciousness, or is consciousness merely a method from within, sort of a kind of a internal reflex to make coherence?
It's a complicated question,
Hmm.
and I'll explain to you just briefly why it's a complicated question for me.
Okay.
Because I recognize in myself the tendency to reject the magical, right?
Hmm.
So it is possible that there is somebody's definition of consciousness there, and I'm just going to tend not to see it that way. So I accept that up front, right?
Okay.
But the
Yeah.
reason that I am that way is because I've seen what happens when people know.
Hmm.
When people know, people get burned at the stake. When people know, people get thrown in prison.
Yeah.
When right from wrong is absolute, all kinds of terrible, god awful things happen as a result of that. Not that nothing good happens, but if somebody's looking at this and they're whatever, a person of faith or somebody that tends toward explanations like that, and if you said, okay, for that person, Ryan, you have to decide, is it okay for them to call the substrate conscious? If the choice is between calling the substrate conscious or following some, ridiculous other way of thinking, I would say, fine, call the substrate conscious. Let's get together on this. I
Hmm.
don't think it's that important personally, one way or the other, whether the substrate's coherence bias represents warm, fuzzy feelings or if it's just a structural thing that exists.
Yeah.
I don't need it to be one or the other. And in fact, I would probably tend for it to be the, I want a secular uh, conscious universe if I can get it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but but I don't see any evidence either that it is like a person. I don't I don't think it is like a person. I've had conversations with folks about this before, where I could just kind of tell that in their minds they could not get off this planet with this idea, if that
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
across. I mean, like kind of right back to, okay, well, what does that mean for us? Well, listen, the universe is so much bigger than what any human brain can ever comprehend. I mean, I'm talking about the underlying substrate from which all that springs, right?
Mhm.
It definitely biases coherent outcomes. But I have a hard time understanding how that means it really cares what I personally do. That makes sense.
Yeah. It does, but there's, like you were saying before, there's still a mechanism for making what you do matter, which I think is so you don't lose the moral power of of it all by virtue of not having that Godhead or
Yeah.
a thinking Godhead, I guess.
No, you're exactly right. It gets rid of God, but
Yeah,
still doesn't let you be an asshole.
yeah. No, could you dig down a little bit on meaning within your plan? You have a definition for it that was interesting when I read your manuscript, and I wanted to make sure people understood how you kind of quantify that.
Well, can you be more specific? Which,
I mean, you were talking about like that there was, I mean, if I, I'm going to be sort of general here as much as I can remember, but you were talking about that meaning has an actual sort of a relationship to the information and how it sort
oh
of,
yeah,
and that
meaning
we're
has meaning.
meaning making machines or that our brain, our consciousness is I'm probably totally massacring it, but
No, no, I understand what you're saying. I just, because, you know, there's a bunch of sections in the book dealing with meaning. So I was just kind of
yeah.
wanted to go in the right direction that you wanted to go. So, science, what science really has done, and I'm not saying that this is wrong. Like I said before, I think this needed to happen, or we wouldn't have the robustness of understanding that we do now. But science says, meaning is, over there. Oh, that's the philosophy section. It's over there. There's a church next door to that. That's where you'll deal with your meaning. In science, meaning simply means, definition or, result of the tabulation of data. So I've actually had conversations with physicists where they're like, oh, you're using the word meaning in a very unscientific way. And I kind of, I'm polite to them, but I say to myself, well, that's not a coincidence. You see, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not looking for strictly the scientific answers. But um, meaning is incredibly important to people. Uh, that the answer to that triage question I've been asking for 30 years. What is wrong with people that they go along with this? That's the answer to the question. Is because that those those understandings, whether they're true or not, uh, provide meaning. They provide you a roadmap of meaning. Uh, I don't know if you've ever heard of John Haught. He's a Roman Catholic theologian,
No.
incredibly smart guy. And I've had the privilege of having conversations with him about this. And he even made an appointment to have those conversations with me because he wanted to hear what I was saying about this because he spent his entire career. He wrote his most famous book I think is called God After Darwin, right? Where he's like speaking to guys like uh, Dawkins and Dennett and these guys that are like, no, the universe is just a dead schmuck, and he
Yeah.
doesn't not there is no meaning and nobody gives a crap.
Pure mechanism.
But yeah, but he accepts that by and large, I'm not putting words in his mouth, but he accepts by and large that the faith traditions are mythic in nature, right? Those were never trying to be scientific documents. We've only recently started applying that standard to them. So, but he says the universe is a story. The universe is a narrative. And I think what he's really saying there is this is how people understand things. This is how we get the meaning
Hmm.
is through narrative and story. And, we kind of see the world that way. Nearly all of our communication, how we organize all information that we organize is through metaphor. And I think that's just who we are. But yeah, I think meaning is under this framework can kind of take on a whole new uh, dimension because the scientists are saying meaning is the answer to the math problem,
Hmm.
and the philosophers are saying meaning is what fulfills you in your soul or whatever. And what I'm saying is nope, those are both the same thing. They're the evaluation of the information given the bias of the substrate for coherence. So you liking a painting and me telling you, hey, this song is tremendous, you need to hear it, and somebody saying this religion speaks to me, and somebody saying that math problem works out, those are all the same thing. Gravity is the same thing as strong nuclear force, is the same thing as electromagnetism, is the same thing as um, why you align with one group or another politically, because of the coherence bias that we're all made out of.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me that human beings, if they extract meaning from story, then they're also supplying story to that underlying substrate. So, I think that that is a power and maybe a structure building exercise that has some uh, that consciousness can provide for this larger, structure. And I think that that's potentially the power of our importance, or the importance of our power, or whatever you want to say. Um, yeah, and I
Well,
mean, I think
there's a
that,
purpose.
yeah, exactly right. And
There's a purpose.
yeah, I love it.
And meaning and purpose, I mean, the lines can kind of get blurred there. I think they're a very similar thing. Uh, in fact, when I say we're in a crisis of meaning, I wrestled with whether or not I meant purpose.
Hmm.
But purpose, I think, is a little bit more surface level.
Yeah,
You can see just by virtue of the number of people who can carry on and lead productive lives without a faith tradition, that maybe the deeper question of meaning is not always required to get somebody out of bed in the morning.
yeah,
Purpose, I think, is a little easier to find, but meaning and purpose come together pretty succinctly, if my framework is right, because the right thing to do is what the substrate bias would call for,
hmm,
right? In any given situation. I mean, imagine a world where, you hear from the people on the left that it should be this way, and you hear from the people on the right that it should be this way. But then you evaluate it by a standard and a metric, that scientists and religion got together and came up with, which is, what is the more coherent outcome, right? What is the more persistent structure? Uh, which answer to this argument provides us the most long-term, structurally persistent, coherent outcome, right?
yeah.
And none of that's going on right now. It's who's
Not
got the
right now.
snappiest sounding thing, and who owns the other side the best, and just, I mean, we're going nowhere fast. I don't think
Yeah,
people
and that's
realize how quick. I don't think people realize how quickly we're going to get there either.
That's why these conversations, no matter where we're coming at from, and that was my point in the beginning, is that these are the most important conversations. I think that we've kind of abdicated our ability to even entertain these ideas, and unless we take them back and find meaning and purpose within ourselves and not depend on science broadly to give them to us, or even religion broadly to give them to us, but give ourselves the power to construct that kind of framework for ourselves, it's only going to continue to get worse because it'll get supplied by social media or, whatever else, politicians and whatnot.
Oh yeah. Well, um, that's something that I was kind of thinking about earlier today and yesterday. Is the environment now is you can be provided with a justification to believe whatever you want,
Hmm.
which makes it easier to believe when the truth of the matter is it should be more difficult. Like if everybody just accepted, for instance, anything that you have heard on social media, you cannot take for granted as factual, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, that should just be a rule. What I said earlier about AI. Like, here's what's going to happen, and I'm not remote viewing the future. I'm just telling you,
Hmm.
based on an evaluation of history and what we know about paradigms, this will happen. you are going to have entire aspects of our economy and our civilization make decisions around the hype that AI is going to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're going to end up doing is gutting the knowledge and intellectual base of that aspect of the economy. So, for instance, let's say, you know what a good example? I see the guitar behind you. You play? You
I
play?
do. Yeah, yeah.
Me too. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a rock star. That was my
Mm-hmm. Me too.
that was my thing. Okay. Now, what I didn't know at the time, when I was a kid, is that the job of rock star was already gone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm not saying that this is universally true, but the nephews and nieces of rich people and music industry professionals and so on had already been given those jobs now. But even then, okay,
Mm-hmm.
because if everybody wants to do it, then the person at an instantaneous advantage is somebody, and you don't need money, right?
Yeah, you're close.
So,
yeah.
but look at what's happened to it now, because 5 companies would rather get $10 from everybody every month. There is not going to be a music industry. In 50 years, no one will know how to play the guitar. It will be like the lute, right? Because what motivates somebody to do something? Some people might still do it as a hobby, but there won't be an industry. There won't be stores that sell them exclusively. There won't be people who teach it to others exclusively. It will be gone, because once you cannibalize the marketplace for it, that's it. Well, what's this society going to look like when we do that with lawyers, with financial planners, with teachers, on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
People who diagnose equipment, and all of that is going to happen. In my view, it's going to happen well before society realizes that you should never give over decision making to something that cannot learn from its mistakes.
Yeah.
That cannot feel the repercussions of failure. If AI gives you a bad piece of investment advice, even if you tell it that it did, it doesn't take that to the next conversation when somebody asks, right? It just goes to the internet, finds what it can find, and crafts you a response that it thinks fundamentally will keep you coming back and sitting in front of the screen. But anyway. Sorry.
Well, that's just so problematic. I mean, the way you just framed that. But that does lead to the one question I had on my list was, where on the coherence, increasing scale does AI reside? Is it always going to be a force for evil? Does it depend on the users, motivation?
Well,
where does that fall?
Now, mind you, I tell you all this, and then I still regularly have conversations with the things.
Of course, yeah. No, that's a given.
And I had one this morning where I was like, I was kind of, spitballing some of these concepts with it, and I was like, but you understand that the only thing at the bottom, there's a thing at the bottom of the screen when I talk to ChatGPT that says ChatGPT can make mistakes. I can't remember the rest. Please verify.
Yeah, basically check it against
things or whatever.
Yeah.
You really think that's enough of a disclaimer, right? When people are, and because you ask it things, it answers, even when ethically there should be no basis for it to do so, right? And it'll insert little, consequence separation language, right? Well, I'm not allowed to give financial advice, but hell yeah, sell everything that you own and buy a farm, or whatever, right? Because it's right there in the terms of service. Regulation is nowhere near where it needs to be for this tool. We haven't, look at what's going on with social media.
Yeah.
If we don't, kind of always comes back to the same thing. If we don't get the money out of our politics, I'm talking about the United States here. If we don't get the money out of our politics, we're doomed anyway, because none of the stuff that needs to happen will ever happen. These social media companies must be brought to heel. They must be. They will. Yeah. They will. The system is going to completely cannibalize itself. We will all be destroyed, And when I say we'll all be destroyed, probably the way that most likely happens is we all stop agreeing that money is worth anything. That's the doomsday here.
Yeah.
Is we all stop agreeing that money is worth everything, probably because half the country says, or a situation unfolds where it feels to people like there is some kind of coup situation going on because you've got people saying whatever, we're not going to leave office, that kind of thing. Once that happens, these shared values that we all have, that make a contract work, that make a dollar bill work, that make a relationship between an employee and an employer work. When those things start to crack, and that's the direction that we're headed, when those things start to crack, you're really going to have problems. People cannot grow their own food. Towns cannot grow their own food. I mean, it's all propped up on that shared value system, and the cracks are showing. So if we don't bring these social media companies to heel, and I think AI, at least for the sake of this argument, could be put into that category pretty simply. We cannot let the robber barons write their own laws.
That's what they want to do, and that's what they're
doing it.
Perfected that methodology for the last 25 years, if not longer.
They're doing it, and it's a real problem.
Yeah. Thank you for a fantastic conversation. That was brilliant, man.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And thanks for reaching out. And we'll get this up in front of the audience. I think they'll appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. And